Welcome to the session. I think we should start by having each of the panelists introduce themselves. Kristin, would you like to go first?
Sure. I just wanted to make sure I was the only Kristin. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. My name is Kristin Sotak. I'm from the School of Business in the Management and Marketing Department. And I believe time flies. I think this is now my fourth year. I'm bringing in a couple of years or a year from SUNY Farmingdale. So I have that experience. Nice to see everyone.
Maggie.
Hi, everyone. I'm Maggie Schmuhl. I am in my fourth year at SUNY Oswego, and I'm in the Criminal Justice Department. And yeah, I'm excited to be here today, share with you guys some of the things that I think have helped me stay organized in the portfolio preparation process. So thanks for having me.
Murat.
Hi, everybody. My name is Murat Yasar. I am an associate professor in the history department. This is my 8th year. I'll be, I guess, talking about the same thing, portfolio building and what to do.
Dan?
Hi, I'm Dan Schlegel. I think also like my 4th year, like there's a bunch of 4th year-ish people. I'm in the computer science department. Yeah, I guess I'll talk about these crazy skills we all have to learn for a few years and then forget about.
Which is why we don't have senior faculty doing this. And Brian.
Hi, I am Brian Moritz. I'm an associate professor in the communication studies in the School of Communication, Media, and the Arts in my 7th year. Good golly, Miss Molly, that's a long time. So just this past year went through the tenure and promotion process, that whole thing. So if anybody has specific questions about that, I'm a recent veteran of that war.
So I thought we'd start by perhaps having some general discussion from the panel, and then we'll have some general Q&A, and then we'll move into breakout rooms with each of the panelists. So first, how do you organize your materials? One of the things that's a little unique about Oswego is that we don't have a standard way of putting together a portfolio, and different departments use different approaches. Would anyone like to volunteer to start that discussion?
Well, I can start if no one else wants to do it. So it's very interesting, actually. You're right, John, that we don't have a standard. And I find that interesting in general, because that was one of the things I struggled when I was a new faculty. And I hoped to find a template to work on, and there was none. However, I think it's probably more or less the same in every department. I was given materials from senior faculty and their retention folders and files, and as well as promotion and tenure files as well. So I kind of used that as a template. And when newer faculty came to the department, I passed on my files to them, which in a way means that now we have a template in the department, which was the folder prepared by God knows who in the 70s, and that became the template, and we are still using that, more or less. The only change in the recent couple of years is that we transitioned to online Google Drive instead of hardcore paper files. So, but I think more or less, based on my conversation with faculty from other departments, other departments follow a similar strategy, that they created their own templates in a way. I, however, think that it might have been a lot easier now in hindsight if there was, for example, a template that was used by everyone in the same college, at least, or school, or departments actually came together and created some sort of guidance in that regard, a little bit better guidance than perhaps mentorship to their new faculty. I think I'll end there, so I will let everyone else to kind of jump in, and we can talk about the details later.
Maggie, you had your hand up.
Yeah. So I also, like Murat had mentioned, had reached out to different faculty members in my department. My department was in a bit of a unique circumstance at that point that we didn't have any tenured faculty. So, for us, it was junior faculty kind of just helping each other out. And I was actually, I think, one of the first faculty members, maybe that's not the case, I can't quite remember, that started using the Google Drive as the primary form of preparing the portfolio. And so, I reached out to other friends and colleagues in other departments to kind of get ideas from theirs. And so I guess one thing that I want to say is that my portfolio from my first year is a bit different than what it looks like now, because it took me a while to kind of find an organizational system that made sense to me and, was easily, I think, understandable for those who were reviewing my file. And I do want to say that it's one of my most consistent comments is how organized my file is. And so I'm very proud of that accomplishment, but it took me to like year 5 to get to that, place where I feel really comfortable and really, sorry, I keep saying year 5. I'm in my 4th year. Last year I did my 5th year review. So that's, and I'm happy to screen share and show you what that folder looks like. So if I keep saying year 5, that's because that's the folder I'm going to show you at some point. So, but yeah, so I guess, that's, having something consistent from year to year is really wonderful. But if you're like me and you're, trying to figure it out and so forth, that's okay too. I think I finally have found that structure that I really enjoy, as of this last year. So I'm going to, keep it to future years and ultimately for my tenure file.
So a little bit of background, we actually did used to have a standard, but then when we moved to digital forms of submissions, each year for a while, a couple of provosts back, selected a different example that was to be used as a template. So one year it was Google Drive folders. Another year it was a website. Another year it was a form. Another year it was an Adobe portfolio where you combine documents into one portfolio document. And what happened is people complained about each of those, but those standards stuck within individual departments, but each department adopted a different one. And it's become a bit of a mess. And it would be nicer if there was an institution-wide one. But I think the advice of finding someone, a senior faculty member or your mentor perhaps, might be a good person to talk to, or someone who's recently been going through the process would be a good way of getting a template, as has been suggested. Other approaches.
So, my tactical approach for the longest time was about this time of year, start scrambling and trying to find everything that I needed to submit for my file, because I realized, oh crap, it's due in 3 weeks, which do not do the opposite of me. So I think, what's been said before, I think is important. Know your department's structure, know whoever, if you have a personnel committee or the senior faculty or whomever does the initial review for your department, ask them, make sure that you're submitting it exactly the way they want to. The way I did it, similar to Maggie's, I think, is that I have a Google folder, obviously, and I have separate folders for each of the 5 areas that criteria that we're judged in. So we have Master of Subject Material, Scholarly Creative, Teaching Service, Professional Development. And then everything related to that, to each one, goes into that folder, which is a nice kind of way to keep keep it organized for everybody, keep it for yourself and for people who are reviewing it. One kind of, I guess, little tip and trick, and then I'll let someone else. I see Ramin's got his hand up. Make sure that you change your file names to something that will be understood by the people reviewing it. So you get your reviews, and it might be like, you know, the name of the course and the course number and all that stuff. Make sure you take the minute to rename it, you know, BRC 301 reviews spring 2020 or something like that. It just takes 2 minutes, but it can be something that it can easily slip your mind as you're collecting everything, but it'll make it easier for the reviewers to know what that is.
Ramin, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I'm just coming back to what John was saying, really. Some of you may be aware that we bought into a tool called Athis. This tool is primarily now being used for gathering information for our self-study, and I think it's going to help us in that context. But it is a pretty flexible tool, and one of the things we're going to roll out, at least through a pilot, and I am looking for some guinea pigs actually, is trying to do a review, and guinea pigs would be departments, not individuals, to do the review based on or using Athis, because it does have workflow, and it, you know, they're creating components for us, scholarly activity, teaching, and so on. Files can be submitted, and everything will be organized the same way across campus if and when this is completed. And it, as I said, it comes with workflow, so it will go to the right people once you submit your file, and when they want to make recommendations forward to the dean, then it will then again go to the right people. You know, that's one of the issues we have right now. We have bylaws that say one thing, and then we go to the Google Drive business, and then people do it all kinds of different ways, and they don't necessarily follow the exact language or abilities that were intended with the old folders, right? I mean, you gave your folder, none of you will remember this probably except John and me. You gave your folder, it went to some drawer in some department, and then people went to it and looked at it or whatever, and then it went back into that drawer. You never saw it again as a person who submitted that file. You put things in the Google Drive. I mean, I don't know, you can keep adding stuff to it, I guess. And that was never really the way it was designed before, unless, you know, personnel committee chair came to you and said, you forgot this or you forgot that, or need to add another element to it. So I just want to throw it out there that Athis, I'm hoping certainly that can remedy some of the confusion that, and John is 100% right, we've had across campus, because if we have 30 departments, there are 30 different ways people are doing this at this point. So you can imagine for liberal arts and sciences, it's got to be crazy, because you got all the departments doing it in different ways. And that would be, I think for our campus, it would be definitely helpful to add a little bit of a standardization to it. I mean, there are 5 components, right? There isn't 6. There's exactly 5. And literally 3 of them are absolutely critical to be very clear about your contributions every year. So I'll just stop there.
I shared a link to the Athis website, and specifically, this would be the faculty activity and curriculum vitae component of that. And it's something that's being adopted for self-study, but it offers a lot of other things, including outcomes assessment, and it integrates with Blackboard. But that's a topic for some future work as it gradually gets integrated. So another thing that many people have used is Google Sites, or a website. Is anyone using that for their portfolios?
Yeah, I am.
Okay, could you talk about that a little?
I can talk about it if
Sure.
you want to. So I think everyone said a lot of great things so far. So I'm trying to think about myself 4 or 5 years ago when I first started thinking about, you know, what, like, you know, you have those 5 subject areas. So like teaching, like what do I put in? I teach these classes. What else do you want to know? So I started to see other people's examples. And if John, if it's okay, I could actually share my Google site
Sure.
with everyone. So I'll put that in the chat after I'm done talking, because I think maybe that will help everyone see like what does the Google site look like, and also what goes in the different categories, because I know when I first started, I didn't know. So similar to, I think, how maybe Brian was saying, you have those 5 categories. So for my Google site, it's set up so each of those, like teaching, scholarly ability, service, I have a tab for each one of those, and then under it I have all of the information. So Google Sites, it's been pretty easy to use. You don't have to be really good at developing websites or anything like that. It's pretty easy in terms of being able to link, for example, your student evaluations for your teaching tab. So I have all of that in there. So if people, want to go and say, like, oh, well, what is Kristin doing for teaching? You can see like spring 2020, I taught this class, click here for the teaching evaluations, peer evaluations there, student mentorship, club advising, those sorts of things. So that's just kind of how I use that. And it's also easy to update, as you get like a publication or you do something, just, kind of keep up with it. That kind of helps too. So I'll stop talking, and I'll add that link in the chat now.
Thank you. And Romain pointed out something important, which is that 2 of the categories you normally don't talk too much about in terms of this. The first one is the mastery of subject matter, where you list your degree and any awards you receive. That tends to be a pretty small component of it. The other area, which is not emphasized quite as much, is continuing growth. Well, it's not as traditional as a continuing growth, and that's something that really involves all the other categories. So when you talk about teaching, research, and service, the continuing growth is something that's expected kind of in all of those 3 categories. So, you should include something in each of the 5 criteria, but what you're including in the first and the last categories all relate to the other 3 in terms of your credentials, and your continuing growth in teaching, research, and service. So maybe we could talk a little bit about what types of things you include in terms of teaching. Any volunteer?
John, I would like to also say, while we are on this subject, that one of the habits that I wish I had learned when I first came here, but I learned it later, was to record everything you do, every committee you served, every new class you created, you taught, even sometimes meeting you attended. So those will be very useful when you are preparing the big tenure and promotion file. So some of these things go unnoticed, but and when I was creating, Brian probably had the same experience. It's like, it's difficult to remember what happened 7 years ago. And you do a lot. We do a lot. So have a piece of paper, start writing this down. You will thank yourself.
I use the same strategy that Brian described, which is whenever there was something due, I put it all together. But if you do this as being suggested here, gradually, and include things as you do them, it makes it so much easier, or at least I imagine it would. And I think many people do that very effectively. So
in terms of teaching, John, to your question, what to include, because that's always a weird one to think about. So what obviously you put your teaching evaluations, the quantitative and the qualitative ones that you have in there. And I think it's important with that, in your letter, to address them kind of straight on. And if you have, let's say, low scores in something, or a score that you think might be problematic's the right word, but we're academics, so we'll say it, problematic, address it and kind of say, yeah, these scores were low. This is why I think it happened. This is blah, blah, this is what we're doing to improve that, blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I would also include, like, I started including my syllabi for my courses, sample assignments that I would do. I don't think I included any PowerPoints or any of the decks from classes, but certainly that's an option if that's something you do. As we've been teaching online, certainly some course modules or some videos that you've made, just kind of, that this is a chance to really show who you are as a teacher and demonstrate it and kind of brag on yourself a little bit. And I think that that making sure that it's not just the student evaluation voices that are heard, because while they're valuable, we all know the problems with them, and we all know what it's like to feel like student evaluations are determining whether you're going to get retained or promoted. And so having the syllabus in there, having the assignments, I'm sure we all have teaching statements from when we were on the job market. Dust that off, polish that off, kind of anything that you can put in there to, kind of think of it as a portfolio for your teaching. Teaching isn't just what we do in front of the classroom 2 or 3 times a week. It's all of that.
Maggie included a note too about keeping a Google Doc for notes of things to add, and also just reflecting back at your Google Calendar that will have all those meetings and other things that you've done that are worth including. But building a portfolio and explaining what and reflecting on your teaching is something that I think the deans generally do appreciate.
Yeah, I was just going to add that beyond, including student teaching evaluations, and I don't just, throw in the student evals, I generally kind of give an overview of my understanding of them, and, we'll generally pick, a couple of good comments and a couple of negative comments to reflect on, and, talk about how I, intend to incorporate that feedback in future courses and such. But, like Brian said, including syllabi, sample assignments and such. And in fact, I don't know if I've actually included a sample assignment, but that's a good thing to think about. But I also, and it's going to vary from department to department about what the expectations of having peer evaluations are. But I do include the peer evaluations and reflections on those evaluations. And do I include these reflections in the teaching folder or in my main narrative? So I create a narrative of all of, like a letter of sorts of all of and I imagine other people might do this differently, but of all of the 5 subject areas. And then I use, through the Google folder system, I link to the folder where all those teaching evaluations live. So, I can, kind of pull out different excerpts in that narrative. And then, at the bottom, I'll say, if you would like to see, the peer evaluations and the student evaluations, from this semester, please, head to or use this link to follow to this folder, and it will bring them right to that folder, which is really nice. So there's, a capability of using links and such in Google folders that can keep everything very organized. Okay, yeah, Dan?
Oh, yeah, I was just gonna build on something that Brian was saying earlier about how, it's sort of your opportunity to sort of brag a little bit, I guess. So I've been told that my folder is overproduced. Okay, there's too much in it, and that, but one of the things I've been doing is most semesters linked somewhere in from my area where I have student evaluations, I talk about something I did different that semester and how it went. Sometimes it's like, we fixed the prereqs for this course, and did that make a difference? Or we, tried something new to improve student outcomes for this course this semester, and I'll collect a little bit of data. It's not super scientific, but you have the idea, like, oh, did this help? Didn't it help? And we've had experiments that worked and some that haven't worked. But I think it kind of shows, the section's called effectiveness in teaching or something like that, right? And I think something like that shows that you're trying. Maybe not that you're always effective, but at least you're trying.
And one of the things you mentioned in the chat was that you submit this is going back to the earlier question, you submit things as a PDF with, I assume, links to other supporting material?
Yeah, so computer science is weird, and, we use old tools even though we're supposed to be on new things, right? So I use LaTeX for everything. And so I just essentially, there's a boatload of PDFs. It collects them all together. There's links between them. Yeah, and I did post my a link to my thing in the chat too. And I can give you the source files if somebody else wants to do things that way too. Just let me know.
Okay, what about research? What types of things do people put into the section on research? Or scholarly activity, more correctly defined, sorry.
Everything you do, any kind of scholarship, writing, outside work that you do. Short, long story short, I mean, obviously a journal article, you'll want to have a copy in there, book chapter, a copy in there, but like, and any kind of outside writing you do. I mean, when I was doing my patented scrambling in a few years, it would be like, oh, right, I did that book review for that website over the summer. I got to get a copy of that or something like that. But also any kind of, public work that you do. Like I keep a blog, I host a podcast, I put links to those in there as just kind of examples of the work I do. And I think having them in there, and then within the narrative, what I would do, and I found very useful for me at least, is very much try to contextualize what this piece meant, both in terms of my overall research agenda, but where it was published. So I didn't get too much into impact factors or anything like that, but this was a leading journal in sports communication, so I published it there. This is a top conference there. I was interviewed by this person, blah 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 blah, on and on. And just I found that to be useful, especially when you if you're putting anything in there that's not a strict scholarly peer-reviewed publication, because I think we've had a lot of discussions in our department, very frank ones, because we have a lot of creative, more creative tenure track faculty than I think a lot of departments do. And so they do work that's not scholarly based. And so giving that story behind it of this is how it was judged, this is who edited it, this is how it was solicited, rather than just I wrote this thing and it went out there. I think give that, again, contextualizing it for the committee members and for the deans and for the people who are reading it, I think is really, really important.
And Vanessa raised a question about being a reviewer for a journal or a conference, goes into that as well. And I think that probably would fit. Although I guess it also does come under service. So
yeah, service.
I thought of that as a service to the discipline. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I think as long as you check with your department on like what their, I suppose, tradition is and how they consider that, I think that's going to be your best option with identifying where some of that does go into. I put conference presentations in scholarly work, but as far as reviews, I put that into a professional service. Like Dan does, breaks it into discipline, department, university. I do the same as well.
And the dividing line is sometimes not entirely clear. For example, when you're a referee for a journal, or if you're a discussant at a conference or an organized session, that's kind of both service and scholarly activity as well, because you're creating some output as well. But it depends. And again, as suggested, talk to your department about where it best fits in your department's conventions.
Yeah, and I would just try to be consistent with that. I also put community service as well. I think I put that in my continuing growth, depending on the type of community service.
Other suggestions?
Something Brian said, I think is very important, is when you publish in a journal in your field, it may be very familiar to you and your department. Like everyone knows, specific journal or list of journals in any given field, but it's not the same for the dean, for the provost, for president. So it is very important to kind of qualify what kind of journal it is. Is it a top level journal, like middle level, A, B, whatever, however, what classifications you have in that discipline? That might be good to include, especially if it's really a good journal. You may want to just make that point clear, because journal titles are not always like intuitive. You don't know if it's like actually solid peer-reviewed academic journal, or some kind of B-level, whatever journal. So it's very, very important to, I think, qualify that. Another thing, like in some disciplines like history, we sometimes write reviews, book reviews, that can be longer than an article, may require more research than an article, because it's the list of book reviews on a specific subject. We are talking 30 pages here. So those, in my field, qualify as scholarship, and it should be under scholarship, but every review is different. So if you write 2 pages of a book review, then you can just negotiate that with the department, etc. I think.
Okay, any other discussion on scholarly activity? Then we've kind of segued into service, and we've seen a little bit of discussion, but anyone have other suggestions for what should be included in the service component?
I don't have anything more to add other than just to reiterate what Dan and I both do is, kind of break it down by different levels of service. At least that's what helps me stay organized. And I think for some departments, contributing to the department is, considered perhaps different than contributing at a university level. So serving on a university level council is something they may expect in your 4th or 5th year in the department, but perhaps just sitting on a committee or not, really taking any kind of leadership role in such in your 2nd and 3rd years or something. That's all I think areas that you can, if you break it into those kind of sections and then talk about, what it is you've been doing. So what were your responsibilities? And if you just attended those meetings, right? And I guess I wouldn't be so shy to just say that. Like there's definitely been committees where I'm like, I attended this. I didn't really take on any leadership roles. I was there to kind of gain a better understanding of this problem or this issue on campus. And, next year I have these, goals of increasing that, right? And so forth. So I think that, keeping that organized in that way is important.
Yeah, and to kind of piggyback on what Maggie said, I think there's that, I just saw the word in the comments, but there's a pipeline to service, right? You kind of start off in department in your first year or 2, and then you move on to kind of school-wide and then university-wide. And then as you move on, you take on leadership. I would recommend, taking on, as if you're able to take on some like departmental committee leadership roles that are maybe not as super taxing time, but again, those are things that I think help and look good in your packet as you're talking about these things. And then moving on to university service, like something like FA, faculty assembly, is incredibly good for either leadership or just like attending meetings like Maggie and I do. If there are any other FA members, I don't recognize them from right now. I'm sorry about that. But I think those are good. And in terms of what you actually put in your folder for it, I think if you're on a committee that's above the department, a lot of times you will get a letter from the chair thanking you for serving on it. Like FA, we get a letter from the FA chair every year. I think that's the only university-wide service that I do. But I think that you can certainly ask for letters from committee chairs, and just like basically says, thank you for serving on the committee, yada, yada, yada. And that's just something like a tangible thing that you can have in the folder to recognize the service that you're doing.
Catalina asked a question. Since we're preparing these folders in early January, should we put forthcoming activity, such as a spring conference or service activity, or wait until the next review? Reactions?
I guess I don't. I try not to go too far into the future, and I make that kind of clear in my cover letter that I'm considering all activities from my last review, and I put the date of that last review, and the current review, and I put the date of that current review. For instance, if I have been, so a couple years ago, I completed the AQ program, And that was, that began in the spring semester, but of course I had a review before that point, right? And so I did say that I was accepted into that because, you know, I had applied, you know, into it and was accepted into it. I hadn't actually started that. So I just left it at, I had, you know, sent in a, you know, interest statement and so forth, and, you know, was told that I was accepted into this program and I'm looking forward to starting it. You know, I try not to, you know, put more in there than I know will happen for sure, right? Same thing with like current research. I will, you know, be very vague about like some current projects that I'm working on, but you know, if you're not confident that those projects are going to go down the pipeline, that's, you know, something you want to just be careful about. You know, if you say that you're working on, you know, 5 different papers and, you know, by the time tenure comes around, you've only gotten the one, you know, finished. It's just something to think about.
I kind of go the other way, or I kind of went the other way. And I like Kristin's idea. I don't know if I specifically broke it out as smartly as she did in the chat, but have a current projects and list their status. And I do, you know, to Maggie's point though, I think that if you know, I'm definitely submitting this to AEJMC or BEA at a given date and the review is still happening. I think that there's no harm in saying this is my plan to submit, or I'm going to be submitting to, especially if you know a specific conference. Like if you just say, well, I'm going to submit this to conferences, and that, don't do that. That seems kind of vague and like Maggie said, begging for trouble. But if you know I'm sending this to this conference, or I'm doing this service activity in May and I've registered for it, or I'm planning to register for it, I don't think there's any harm in doing that. I think that shows that kind of current engagement that is important.
And Kristin mentioned in chat that under research, he lists current projects and then lists the status, such as under a category of submitting in spring 2021, or there's an under review section and so forth, so that you're demonstrating that you have an ongoing research agenda, or ongoing scholarly agenda. So, but as Maggie suggested, you make only list things that you're sure you're actually going to do. But if you're definitely, if you have an article that you're going to be submitting in the next few months, or if you have submitted something that's under review at a journal, certainly demonstrating that you have an ongoing scholarly agenda is helpful.
And I'll also note that in like a subsequent year's review, if I have, you know, published an article that was under review, I kind of make reference to, you know, in my 3rd year review, I had said that this article was being considered under its like 2nd review at this journal. It's now been accepted and has been published online, or, you know, something to that. So again, kind of showing that continuity. But yeah, I would just be careful about, you know, things that may not have like a clear status, right? You know, if you've, you know, worked on some data collection and such, you know, just make it clear that that's where you're at in the process. You know, not that it's, you know, forthcoming, you know, because you don't know that, right? If you're just in that like early level stage. So just to be transparent about all of that.
Okay, now given the time, I think I'm going to open breakout rooms, and we have breakout rooms for each of the panelists, and you should be able to self-select them. And I put in the category, and Maggie is social sciences. I forgot to write that in. And Dan is in CLAS. So join whichever group you'd like to talk more to, and you should have that option.